Theatre Royal Drury Lane is the oldest working theatre in London and is arguably the most haunted theatre in the world. A place of memories and dreams, triumph and disaster. The present building dates from 1812 and is the most recent of 4 playhouses that have stood on the site since 1663. Actors and actresses have played their parts, audiences have laughed and cried, but numerous phantoms are said to lurk in the wings, haunt the stage and seats of this magnificent venue. At least 7 ghosts refuse to leave the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. But who are they, and why are they haunting? The upper circle is haunted by the most famous apparition to appear at the theatre, the man in grey. He's been seen by staff, cast, musicians and patrons many times. He appears as the slim figure of a man, medium height, with a handsome face and square chin. He wears a white powdered wig, a white ruffled shirt, a grey riding cloak, and either wears or carries a tricorn hat. A large sword hangs from his waist, and dark leather riding boots complete his sartorial splendour. He manifests during daylight hours between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m, and all witnesses describe the same appearance and attire of the man. No sound accompanies the man, but he does follow a precise track in the upper circle. He is first observed as a solid, clearly visible figure occupying the first seat of the 4th row. He then walks leisurely along the gangway at the back before disappearing into a wall at the far end. Actors and management welcome his appearance as he generally appears during rehearsals of shows that become a huge hit. For this reason, some actors call him Friend Arnold. But who is he? Why is he haunting? And who has witnessed the mysterious man in grey? Jack Hallam, writing in his 1977 book, The Ghost's Who's Who, writes that the man's name is Arnold Woodruff and describes him as a late 18th century dandy. He goes on to claim that Woodruff was stabbed to death in a battle on stage. Could there be some truth in this story? One of the theatre's historians, Walter James McQueen Pope, wrote that he'd seen the man in grey numerous times and believed the man probably had a girlfriend in the theatre during the 18th century. She was possibly a favourite actress of a theatre manager at the time. He was convinced that the young man was ordered out of the theatre and that a fight soon ensued. The man fell and was fatally wounded by a stab from the dagger, and that the body was hastily walled up in a passageway along which he would walk every night to meet his lover. But is McQueen Pope's theory based on fact or fiction? Records show that in Victorian times, during some structural alterations, workmen reported that part of the wall in the upper circle sounded suspiciously hollow. The decision was made to remove the wall, and a small passage became exposed. On the floor lay the skeleton of a man, flanked with scraps of grey clothing, with a small dagger embedded between his ribs. The location of this grisly discovery is precisely where the man in grey disappears. The walls where the skeleton was discovered were part of the previous playhouse, the third theatre on the site, which opened in 1794 and was destroyed by fire in 1809. But is the man in grey a perpetrator or a victim? An inquest followed, but with no contemporary evidence, an open verdict was returned, and to this day, nobody knows who the victim was or why he was killed. The decision was made to bury the remains in a small graveyard on the corner of Russell Street and Drury Lane, which ceased to be a burial site in 1853. Who has witnessed the man in grey? It seems rather a lot of people have seen this apparition looking down from the upper circle. Over the years, he was witnessed during the rehearsals of Oklahoma, Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, My Fair Lady and Miss Saigon. However, he was not seen in rehearsals or during the performances of Noel Coward's Pacific 1860, which opened in 1946, but was something of a flop, finishing its run after only 4 months. It appears that it's not just those on stage that have witnessed him. In 1938, at just after 10 a.m. on a spring morning, a rehearsal was in progress for The Sun Never Sets, which was opening in June. A cleaner, on her first day at the theatre, entered the upper circle and witnessed a man in grey, wearing an unusual hat, sitting on the end seat of the 4th row, gazing down at the stage. Thinking he must be an actor, she put down her broom and pail and approached the man to speak to him. As she drew closer, the figure seemed to melt and rapidly disappeared. In only a matter of seconds, something caught her eye, movement near the exit door on the right side of the circle. It was the same figure, walking along the back of the circle. He suddenly vanished into the solid wall. She had never heard of the man in grey, but when asked to describe him, she detailed the sword and riding boots. Her description matched those of other witnesses. In March 1939, more than half of the cast of Ivor Novello's The Dancing Years were gathered on stage for a photograph. As the cast looked up, they witnessed the man in grey, stalking his regular route. The show went on to become one of Ivor Novello's best-loved musicals. In 1939, a group of 6 people, including James Wentworth Day, Harry Price and McQueen Pope, carried out a psychic investigation at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. Suddenly, Wentworth Day's secretary grabbed his arm and pointed up towards the high ceiling of the venue. As they looked up, they saw a grey-blue luminous light hovering in the royal box. Within moments, the light had moved towards the upper circle, but vanished before the rest of the group had a chance to see it. Was this a slightly different, perhaps camera-shy version of the man in grey? During the Second World War, the theatre was taken over by the Entertainment National Services Association. The organisation was established to provide entertainment for the British Armed Forces during World War II. A number of members of ENSA went on to have successful careers in the entertainment industry after the war, including Terry Thomas, Peter Sellers and Kenneth Connor. One autumn evening in 1942, Stephen Williams, the broadcasting officer, reported that he saw the ghost clearly as a solid apparition whilst he was climbing the grand staircase near the upper circle's entrance. In 1943, Mrs. R. Hogburn, a member of the ENSA staff, saw the same figure in the same location. She was a visitor to London and had not heard of the haunting at that time. The man in grey was also witnessed at this time by stage, radio and film and television actor Henry Oscar, who was the director of drama for ENSA during the war. One evening, he was on fire watch in the empty building. Enemy bombers were a real threat, and Oscar was patrolling the theatre. As he crossed the stage, his torchlight illuminated a corner of the auditorium. He noticed movement and saw the figure of a slim man in grey around the level of the first box. Oscar reported, there was no doubt in my mind that this was the same apparition that habitually haunted the upper circle. It was certainly no mortal intruder, too shadowy in outline, besides being quite definitely in costume. The riding boots, grey breeches and coat, the ruffled shirt and tricorn hat, even the sword hilt were all plainly visible in the moment that I saw the figure. Henry Oscar did not stay to observe the figure. Overcome by fear, he raced back to the office that served as the Firewatch headquarters. Oscar did not see the figure again on future patrols. In September 1950, actor Morgan Davis, appearing in the stage production of Carousel, witnessed the man in grey. During a matinee performance one Saturday, the house was full, except for one empty box. Morgan Davis looked at the box and continued with his role. Moments later, he glanced back to see the box was now occupied by the solitary figure of a man dressed in a grey cloak and a ruffled shirt. The apparition was standing and slowly raised an arm. As Davis witnessed the man, he realised the arm was indeed transparent and that he could see through it to the illuminated doorframe of the box. During this 25-minute scene, the man in grey was visible for at least 10 minutes before vanishing. The other actor in the scene was facing away from the box and did not witness the apparition, but one of the chorus girls was adamant that she had seen the man in grey during another matinee performance. Morgan Davis said he'd been unaware of the theatre's haunted reputation. Welsh actor Sir Harry Seacombe appeared on stage at Drury Lane in the 1967 musical The Four Musketeers, opposite Aubrey Woods. Seacombe stated, "The whole ruddy cast saw him once. He always made his appearance before 6 p.m. and then popped off again, haunting to rule, I suppose." The man in grey also appeared to two actors in Gone with the Wind, which ran in the early 1970s, and in 1973, Dame Anna Neagle, along with other members of the cast, witnessed the man in grey during performances of No No Nanette. Is this London's most famous ghost? Many would say the man in grey is. But is he a calming and reassuring sight to behold? For many on stage, he is a symbol of success. Is this why the Theatre Royal Drury Lane has turned down at least one offer of an exorcism in its upper circle? The apparition of Joseph Grimaldi still takes a spectral bow at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, as well as at Sadler's Wells. Widely regarded as the father of modern clowning as we know it, Grimaldi became the most popular British entertainer of the Regency period. The character he created, with his iconic white face and roguish behaviour, would be adopted by future generations of clowns, often known as Joeys in his memory. Born in Aldwych to a family of performers and dancers, he first appeared dancing on stage at Drury Lane at the age of 2. Joseph went on to become the most influential comic actor and celebrated clown in history. Grimaldi had genius comic timing, and his extremely athletic performances made those watching roar with laughter. During one performance in 1807, a deaf and mute member of the audience found the act so funny that his power of speech returned, and he shouted out, "What a damn funny fellow." But the intense physical nature of his act took its toll, and Grimaldi retired from the stage as a result of ill health. He suffered from a respiratory condition that left him breathless, and joint problems that caused chronic pain. He quickly spiralled into poverty, after a number of failed business ventures and having been cheated of his earnings by those who were supposed to manage his wealth. His final public performance was a benefit at Drury Lane in June 1828. By this time, Grimaldi could no longer stand and had to be carried on stage in a chair. He died in May 1837 in Islington after a night of excessive drinking. But Grimaldi still makes his presence known at Theatre Royal Drury Lane as well as Sadler's Wells. The floating head of Grimaldi, complete with white and red clown makeup, is said to appear behind people sitting in the theatre's royal box, peering over their shoulders and watching the performers on stage. The floating head has also appeared in the wings, startling the actors on stage. He was witnessed by actress Amanda Holden, who appeared as Princess Fiona in the musical Shrek from 2011 to 2013. She wrote about the encounter in her biography, No Holding Back. Early on in previews, I was doing a scene at sunset where I turned from a princess to an ogre. As I went to exit the stage, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man standing where I was heading. Instinctively, I moved out of the way and said, "Oh, sorry, excuse me." When I came off, I said to Davina, "Who was that getting in the way of stage directions when I meant to be leaving the stage?" She told me there wasn't anybody there. Holden goes on to mention a conversation she had during a break with some crew members about ghosts at Drury Lane. She wrote, "None of these seemed to match the description of the man on stage, so I remained convinced he was a real person until someone mentioned the ghost clown, Joseph Grimaldi, who appears on stage. I immediately got goosebumps and went a bit cold. It turns out Grimaldi guides actors around the stage or makes them move out of his way. I said, 'Oh my God, you are not going to believe this,' but I met him." Some believe the reason only Grimaldi's head is seen is due to his final wish of having his head severed and buried separately from his body. Grimaldi's father, who died when Joseph was only 9, also had the same wish, as he was worried about being buried alive. The coroner stated that Joseph Grimaldi died of natural causes and died by the visitation of God. The invisible presence of Joseph Grimaldi is often blamed for childlike and mischievous behaviour. He prods unsuspecting cleaners, administers kicks on the bottom if he disapproves of something, and tugs actors' wigs and clothing. In the 1890s, British actor Herbert Beerbohm-Tree received a swift kick in the backside whilst delivering a soliloquy as the character of Falstaff during a matinee performance. When Sir Henry Irving heard of the incident, he declared, "The ghost isn't an actor, he's a critic." Actor Tony Britton had the tails of his coat tugged rather sharply by invisible hands during the curtain call in the 1973 production of No No Nanette. The nearest actor at that time was 6 feet away. Often referred to as the helping hands, he's provided important on-stage assistance to a number of aspiring actors. During the successful run of Oklahoma, following the Second World War, a number of cast changes had to take place. A young and fairly inexperienced actress from America, Betty Jo Jones, stepped into the part of Ado Annie. This comedic role proved daunting for Jones, and for the first few times she played the role on stage, she did not receive the laughs she knew the part deserved. One night, as she appeared on stage with 2 other actors, she felt the soft pressure of 2 hands on her shoulders, gently ushering her towards a different location downstage. There she felt the hands carefully reposition her head into a new angle before administering a reassuring pat on the back. As she delivered her lines, the audience responded more positively to the comedy, with rapturous laughter at all the right moments. After the show, she reported what happened, but nobody in the cast, crew or audience had witnessed anything unusual on stage. The helping hands continued to assist Jones throughout the performance and for the following 3 nights with great success. The helping hands also guided Doreen Duke during an audition for The King and I. She was incredibly nervous to audition at a theatre she so desperately wanted to perform in. As she waited to be called onto the stage, she felt the firm, reassuring hands on her shoulders. They stayed with her and guided her to a specific spot on the stage. She sang her piece beautifully, and the nerves slipped away, and then she felt a gentle, reassuring pat on the back. She got the part. She was adamant the hands helped her during rehearsals and right the way through to the show's successful opening night. Then, with one final pat on her back, they left her. Is this Grimaldi, a master of comedy, physical performance and stagecraft, still helping those who tread the boards at his beloved Theatre Royal Drury Lane? Another apparition at Drury Lane is that of popular comedian Leno. He was born in London into a show business family. At the age of 4, he made his first appearance in his parents' music hall act. As a teenager, he became famous for his clog dancing and quickly became the star of the family's act. He became one of the greatest and highest paid music hall performers of all time. Audiences flocked to see his comedy characters that were based on observations about life in London. He also became popular for his appearances as a dame in Drury Lane's spectacular annual Christmas pantomimes from 1888 until his death in 1904. He died at the age of 43, in the arms of his wife at home in Clapham, after continued struggles with his mental health and a series of breakdowns. He suffered from hearing loss, a cantankerous attitude, and alcohol dependency. The cause of death was certified as general paralysis of the insane, often a euphemism for syphilis, but some speculate that Leno's erratic behaviour in the lead-up to his death could have been the result of a brain tumour. His ghost, however, refuses to leave the stage and spotlights for a final time. Actors, musicians and visitors have been haunted by Leno's signature scent of lavender. Leno suffered chronic incontinence and desperately tried to disguise the odour with perfume. Actors on stage sometimes detect his invisible presence as he traverses from wing to wing, the aroma of lavender left permeating the air. Leno's apparition is said to haunt the dressing rooms too. He was witnessed by English actor and comedian Stanley Lupino, who described his encounter at a charity lunch in 1923 and wrote about it in his 1934 autobiography, Stocks to Stars. Late one evening, after a successful performance in pantomime, Lupino felt too tired to embark on the journey home. He decided to rest on the couch in his dressing room. He dimmed the lights, lay down, but suddenly he was struck by an overwhelming fear that he was not alone. He heard the soft sound of a rustle of fabric, a curtain was being drawn, and Lupino sat up to see a shadowy figure move across the dressing room and exit through the closed, solid door. Lupino, somewhat confused at this incident, wandered out of the dressing room to ask the caretaker if he'd seen an intruder in the corridor. The caretaker explained they were the only two present in the building. Puzzled but attributing the incident to tiredness, Lupino returned to his dressing room and lay down once more. After a short while, he heard a noise very close to him. He immediately sat upright, and as he did, he saw himself in the nearby mirror. As he looked at his face in the reflection, he was shocked to see a second face next to his. He described the face as deathly white, but it was unmistakably the face of Dan Leno. Lupino leapt up and rushed out of the theatre and spent the night at the Globe Theatre instead. He never forgot the experience. In his autobiography, he wrote, "There was no mistaking that face. I had seen it many times in photographs and paintings. There was no doubt in my mind, as I gazed at the reflection, that I was looking into the face of Dan Leno." Later, he discovered that this dressing room had been the favourite of Dan Leno and had been the last one that he had used before his death. Months later, Lupino was in the same dressing room again with his wife. Once more, the apparition of Dan Leno appeared. This time he emerged from behind a clothes rack, and both witnessed his distinct face. Other actors and staff have also seen the apparition of Dan Leno. Sometimes occupants of the dressing room hear rhythmic but somewhat inexplicable sounds of heavy tapping or drumming. Many believe this is Leno rehearsing his old clog dancing routine. Coat hangers on the clothes rack seem to be moved by invisible hands and can even vibrate with alarming force. This was witnessed by Harry Seacombe and Tony Britton on separate occasions. Theatre historian McQueen Pope claimed that Leno's ghost would visit him in the dressing room to offer counsel and advice. Lupino died in 1942 and rests in South London's Lambeth Cemetery, just a few feet from the grave of Dan Leno. Perhaps these talented actors are now reunited in death. Theatre Royal Drury Lane is a unique location. It boasts 3 ghosts named Charles. The first and the oldest ghost of the theatre is that of King Charles II. The initial theatre on the site was built in 1663 by Thomas Killigrew under a royal charter granted by King Charles II, but its life was short-lived as it was destroyed by fire in 1672. Another playhouse was constructed, and this one lasted 117 years. The king actively encouraged theatre development, urging new playwrights to create new material and perform at a number of locations, including Lincoln's Inn Fields. He was enthusiastic about elaborate use of scenery and costume, as these reminded him of the court masks he'd seen as a young man. In 1660, the king overturned a ban preventing women from appearing on stage. Some speculate that this was simply to please his mistress, Nell Gwynn, who had a licence to sell oranges and sweetmeats in theatres. But this is not true. Nell Gwynn had been on stage for some time before she caught the king's eye. The love affair between Nell Gwynn and the king is believed to have started in 1668. With the legalisation of acting as a profession for women, it did mean that Nell Gwynn was on stage regularly, and in 1665 Samuel Pepys recorded in his diary seeing pretty, witty Nell at Theatre Royal Drury Lane. On a summer's afternoon in 1948, during a performance of Oklahoma, the ghost of King Charles II and several of his courtiers appeared in the auditorium. He walked down the side gangway of the stalls, climbed onto the stage, and disappeared amongst the rather startled cast. Many of the actors and audience witnessed this royal apparition, who has not been seen since. Charles Macklin is said to haunt the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. He was an Irish actor and dramatist who revolutionised theatre in the 18th century by introducing a more natural style of acting. He was born in 1699 in County Donegal, but was raised and schooled in Dublin. He became a leading figure in theatre, famous for his many performances in tragedy and comedy. He gained great fame playing Shylock in the play The Merchant of Venice, playing night after night to packed crowds and thunderous applause at Drury Lane. His performance was watched by King George II, who was so terrified at the grim, tragic intensity of the performance, he had nightmares for weeks. Yet Macklin was a difficult man, touchy, irate, quick-tempered, and somewhat violent. He loved to gamble and spent many wild nights at the gambling tables with the manager of the theatre at the time, Charles Fleetwood. Macklin's acting style included the rhythm of natural speech, complete with pauses, very much a contrast from the traditional proclamatory style of the old school of acting. Macklin had perfected his use of 3 stock pauses, his short, middle and grand pauses. Once there was a standby prompter in the wings at Drury Lane. He did not know of Macklin's peculiar acting style and took it upon himself to prompt Macklin audibly during a soliloquy. Macklin became incensed with rage, ran over to the man and punched the prompter in the face. He immediately fell to the floor. Running on stage, Macklin told the audience, "The scoundrel had prompted me in the middle of my grand pause." The audience, wild with excitement, gave Macklin a thunderous applause, and the play continued to the audience's delight. But this was a very mild example of Macklin's fury. A more serious and tragic one was to come. On May the 10th, 1735, Macklin was sitting in the green room at Drury Lane with fellow actor Thomas Hallam. They were both performing in a farce named Trick for Trick. Macklin and Hallam began to argue over a wig which they both claimed they wanted to wear. When the dispute became very heated, the more timid Hallam gave up the wig to Macklin, who he regarded as his superior in prestige and position. The raspy and ill-tempered Macklin still continued to goad Hallam. When Hallam answered back, Macklin made a thrust at him with a cane he was carrying and shouted, "God damn you for a blackguard scrub rascal." The stick pierced Hallam's eye and caused an injury to the brain that would prove fatal. Hallam fell to the ground and he died 24 hours later. Before dying, and showing a remarkable spirit of forgiveness, Hallam did what he could to absolve Macklin of the blame, a gesture that most people would consider wholly undeserved. Macklin was tried for murder. During the trial, Macklin narrated that having been provoked, he pointed his cane towards Hallam, but his face turned about unluckily, so that the stick pierced his eye and brain. Macklin conducted his own defence and was convicted of manslaughter. The jury sentenced Macklin to be branded with a letter M on his hand and then discharged. This punishment was never carried out, and many speculate that Macklin, relying on his considerable repute, cheated the hangman. Why was his sentence so lenient? In the same court sessions at the Old Bailey, 11 defendants were sentenced to death, most for the offence of stealing. Within weeks, Macklin was back on stage, starring in The Miser to a packed house. Is it simply the case that Macklin's stage presence transcended personal misdemeanours? Indeed, it is likely the audience wanted to see the actor who had killed another in that very establishment. Macklin went on to live a long life, dying at the age of 97. A grim phantom, tall and emaciated with an unattractive, heavily lined face, has been identified as Macklin's ghost. He has been witnessed walking through the corridors and dressing rooms backstage, before stopping where it is believed that the murder took place. He also walks in front of the orchestra pit, appearing in the early evening, shortly before the start of a performance, around the time the murder took place. Is the spirit of Charles Macklin unable to rest, with guilt consuming him all these years later? The ghost of Charles Keane has been witnessed on several occasions at the Lane. Keane was an Irish-born actor, best known for his revivals of Shakespearean plays. The son of Edmund Keane, one of the greatest but turbulent tragic actors, well known at Drury Lane for his portrayals of villains in particular. Charles followed in his father's footsteps as an actor, but also entered into theatre management. He was witnessed in the early 20th century by a lady visiting the theatre from Birkenhead. During the interval of a matinee performance she attended with her siblings, she spotted a man to her left, sitting on his own, in the front row of the dress circle. He had not been there during the performance. Whispering to her siblings, she pointed out the man's unusual appearance for the time. He had long flowing dark hair and very old-fashioned clothing. Whilst her sister could see the man, her brother couldn't. He only saw a row of empty seats. The performance resumed, and for the first 10 minutes, the ladies continued to see the mysterious man in his seat watching the play. After a while, the man disappeared, but the woman was puzzled. To leave the circle, the man would have had to have passed her gangway seat to ascend the steps. This incident stayed on the visitor's mind until 1945, when she read Walter McQueen Pope's book about Drury Lane. She spotted the photo of Charles Keane and was completely convinced it was he that she had observed all those years ago. A female apparition has been seen numerous times at the Lane. She manifested at least once in the dressing room of Elizabeth Larner during the run of Camelot in 1964. The British actress and singer discovered the figure sitting in her dressing room chair, dressed in theatrical period costume. It is thought that this is the apparition of Sarah Siddons, often regarded as the greatest female performer in English history. She was born in Brecon in Wales and had a long career. Eventually she became known as the Queen of Drury Lane. Her most famous role was Lady Macbeth, who she portrayed for the first time in 1785. She captivated her audience through the magnificence of her emotions as she expressed Lady Macbeth's murderous passions. Instead of portraying Lady Macbeth as an evil queen, Siddons depicted her with a clear sense of maternity and a delicate femininity, which was groundbreaking at the time. Over 400 portraits of Siddons were painted in her lifetime, and Elizabeth Larner recognised Siddons from one of the portraits at Drury Lane. During a performance of the theatre's longest-running show, Miss Saigon, a female apparition was seen inside the auditorium. Sam Hiller, one of the actors on stage at the start of Act 2, witnessed the figure of a woman who appeared to float along the rows of seats in the dress circle. Many of the cast also witnessed this solitary phantom lady. Is this indeed the apparition of Sarah Siddons, who enjoyed so many standing ovations at Theatre Royal Drury Lane? I really hope you enjoyed these stories from Theatre Royal Drury Lane. What a haunted place it seems to be. I was there just recently and I went on a tour, And if you do get a chance to go to London and you want to do something different, I would highly recommend the tour of the theatre. It was really, really good. Let me know if you'd be interested in hearing some more ghost stories from other haunted theatres in London, and I'll look into it. So I've got some bits and pieces to show you at the end and a few more stories for you. There's a bit of an unsolved mystery regarding Joe Grimaldi, the clown. And when he was at Drury Lane in 1803, he went into the green room and he saw this strange-looking, well-dressed man. And on closer inspection, he realised this was his long-lost brother John, who had run away to sea. And John, by some reason unknown, had come into fortune, and in his pocket he had £600 in cash. Now, the Bank of England inflation calculator suggests that today that's the equivalent of about £51,000. And he'd come to Drury Lane to congratulate his brother on becoming such a successful performer. And Joe Grimaldi said to him, "Don't carry such large amounts of money," but Joe had to go on stage, so he left John in the green room. Joe Grimaldi said that when he finished his act, they'd go and see their mother, and John waited and chatted with various actors, but he completely ignored Joe's advice and flashed his cash around. And Joe returned from stage, but there was no sign of John. He'd vanished. And Joe searched high and low, but there was no trace. He looked in all the streets and all the local taverns, but John was never seen again. So what happened of John Grimaldi and why he left the theatre, we will never know. I've got a few royal stories for you regarding the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. So on the 15th of May 1800, the King, that was King George III, was at the theatre in the Royal Box. And as he came in, he bowed to the audience and the crowd all stood up and clapped. And as he bowed his head again, a pistol went off and a shower of plaster descended onto the royal wig, and the would-be assassin missed his target by about 14 inches. In the seats, there was a bit of a struggle, and a man was flung over into the orchestra pit to be seized. And the play continued, but the man was named James Hadfield, and he'd been discharged from the army. He was tried for high treason, but he was found not guilty, and under the influence of insanity at the time. His wife testified that he'd woken up one night and he was about to kill their own child, because God had ordered him to do so. So a near assassination in Theatre Royal Drury Lane. Theatre Royal Drury Lane is quite unusual because it's actually got two royal boxes. There's a king's side and a prince's side. The relationship between King George III and his son, the Prince Regent, ranged from bitterness to outright hatred, and this was spectacularly demonstrated at Theatre Royal Drury Lane one evening. So the king was waiting to watch a play when the prince staggered in completely drunk and behaving wildly. The king was furious by these frequent drunken escapades in public and was greatly concerned that it was tarnishing the reputation of the monarch, and they ended up having a physical fight in front of theatre staff. And in the book that I've got, it says old King George got hold of his son, set about him and soundly smacked his face and boxed his ears. The rotunda was made a no-man's land for the royal parties, who were tactfully persuaded to keep in future to the territory allotted to them. The prince was banished to a box on the other side of the auditorium, and consequently Theatre Royal Drury Lane became the only theatre in the world with two royal boxes. They couldn't even arrive together. Oh my gosh, royal family rifts. There's a couple of stories concerning the great actress Sarah Siddons, who was really regarded as a brilliant actress in tragedy. And in 1801, she was in a rather awful Gothic tragedy called Julian and Agnes. And in the play, she had to rush on stage carrying a baby in her arms. The theatre provided a wooden prop baby as normal, wrapped up in a blanket. But as she rushed onto the stage, she caught the baby's head on the scenery, which was also made of wood. And the loud, hollow sound of wood cracking against the scenery echoes through the theatre. And everybody was in absolute hysterics. But all I can say is thank goodness it wasn't a real baby. And in another story, Sarah Siddons had a really lucky escape. She was in A Winter's Tale and she was on stage when a draught blew her dress over some lamps and the dress caught on fire. Luckily, a stagehand crawled on and managed to put the flames out with his bare hands, saving Sarah and indeed the whole theatre. and apparently Sarah Siddons rewarded him financially for such a gallant act. She was very lucky, but there were other deaths at Drury Lane linked to fires. In December 1844, a very talented ballet dancer, hailed by critics as British ballet's most promising star, was performing on stage playing the part of a royal slave, and sadly her dress brushed up against an oil lamp on the stage and her ballet dress went up in flames in seconds. None of her colleagues dared to go near her, and the fire buckets were all empty, and eventually a stagehand threw himself on top of her and extinguished the fires, but she was so badly burned. Nobody thought to bring the curtain down, so the audience witnessed all of this distressing event, and she died from her burns 3 days later, and she was only 23. I have some theatre bits and pieces to show you in a moment, but I also have a menu. You know me, this is from a very special place indeed, and it's not very far from Covent Garden. Many of you will be familiar with this building. It's called the Shell Mex House, and it sits on the banks of the Thames next door to the Savoy Hotel. Well, it was built in 1931, but before its construction, there was an extremely grand, incredibly opulent hotel on the site, and the hotel's name was the Cecil Hotel. When it opened in 1886, it was the largest hotel in Europe, with 800 really big rooms, and the Savoy only had 268. And it had 3 restaurants that could accommodate 1,150 diners, a beautiful courtyard, and the Palm Court Ballroom, which was used for afternoon tea and elegant dancing at night. It stretched from the Thames embankment right back to its main entrance, which was on the Strand. And during the First World War, the hotel was requisitioned by the Air Board, and the hotel served as the headquarters of the fledgling RAF between 1918 and 1919. And this hotel was built with really fine materials: Sicilian marble, walnut wood, great big pillars, crimson velvet, silk panels. It was exquisite. But sadly, Shell Mex were able to purchase the property, and they completely knocked the structure down and built this on top of it. The only section of the hotel still standing today is its facade, which you can see on the Strand. But I have a menu from this hotel, and it's from a coronation party that took place at the Cecil the day after George V's coronation. So let's have a look at it. It's in French, but I have attempted to translate it for you. Please comment if you can add or correct my translation. Okay, so we start with various canapes, followed by royal turtle soup in cups. Then we have Norwegian cold salmon and trout. I don't know whether that's a terrain. Whitebait, quail stuffed with foie gras and truffles, browned in butter and then baked until finished. That's my understanding of that. Saddle of salt marsh lamb. So this is a type of lamb which is raised in salt marsh meadows in Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy and Picardy, places like that, and parts of the UK, and the sheep graze in these pastures that have high salinity, and it causes their meat to have a very distinct taste, which is considered a delicacy. Parisian potatoes, which are like little balls of potato cooked in butter and garlic. Roast chicken from the Loire Valley with sauce Robert, which is chopped onions cooked in butter with white wine, pepper, and finished with mustard. And that's served with a romaine salad and tarragon. Pastry tartlets with asparagus and cream, maybe soured cream, glazed or iced biscuits, and then a basket of sweets or confectionery or cake, strawberries and cream, and coffee. And I think after that, I'd probably need to sleep for a week. Let me know what you think of that menu. It all looks very opulent, I'll definitely say that. So I've got some theatre things for you today. The first is a document that I have from 1901, and it's from The Sleeping Beauty and the Beast. If you look inside, I'm always struck with these old programmes about how many adverts there are. There's absolutely masses of adverts. But if you look really closely, you'll see that the person playing the lead role is actually Dan Leno, playing Queen Revere. Now, the reason I bought Dan Leno's death certificate is because I had read somewhere that he didn't have one. And then I read that he had one, but it said that it was natural causes. And I thought, well, I need to get to the bottom of this. What is his actual cause of death? So that's why I purchased that death certificate. Although, to be honest, it looks like an entry into a book. It's not like the death certificates we have today, but I paid £8 for that image that you've seen there. It was a PDF image, and that's it, £8. And then I've got this rather special little programme from The Dancing Years, which is the Ivor Novello musical where the cast, it seems, saw The Man in Grey. So I wonder if the person who was holding this and watching the performance ever knew that it's actually got a ghost story connected with it. These little booklets are so lovely to read through and have a look at the pictures. I love all the adverts in there, the adverts for various hotels and women's corsets and all of this sort of stuff. So very special. And then I've got this little postcard, and when I bought this postcard I didn't think much of it, but it turns out it's got a link to a ghost story as well. So let's have a look. I hope you got home all right after the rush. I was sorry you didn't get a seat, but perhaps you got one later on. I am still here. Last Sunday I went to Westminster Abbey. The organ was lovely. I'd like to go again. I have also been to Drury Lane to see Ivor Novello. He plays the piano most of the time. It's a marvellous show. I loved it. And then she says, what is the weather like in Malvern, I think it is? It has been raining here most of the time. Oh, it has been raining most of the time here. I expect you are going to some of the festival plays. My love for Mummy and Daddy. Much love to you. Now, it only occurred to me, having looked at the postmark, that this lady has been to see The Dancing Years, and I hope it sounds like she really, really enjoyed it. And then I've got this one, which is from 1969, from a production of Mame. Now, I always thought it was Marmee or Mam, but it's Mame, and there are some clips of this on YouTube, and it looks wonderful, it really, really does. And of course it's got the wonderful Ginger Rogers starring in it, in Drury Lane, in 1969. Have a look at these pictures though, she looks so different. I couldn't believe that this was Ginger Rogers. She looks almost like Barbra Streisand, very, very different, very 1960s, also a bit like Dusty Springfield. But yeah, that was Ginger Rogers, and apparently she was ever so kind to people on the stage door waiting for autographs, and she would talk to them and ask them where they'd come from to see the play. What an amazing experience to have seen her on stage at Drury Lane. And then I've got this souvenir booklet from My Fair Lady from 1958, and all the pictures that are in this booklet were taken by Cecil Beaton. And I thought I'd like to just show you some of these pictures. And My Fair Lady was a hugely successful show. Made important careers for Julie Andrews, I suppose, and Rex Harrison, amongst other people. And it's still very much loved today, isn't it? The film with Audrey Hepburn is still on every Christmas, I think, pretty much. All very, very popular. Well, that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Come and find me on Instagram. If you'd like to buy me a cup of tea, there's a Ko-fi link in the description below. I've got virtually no voice left now, so I'm going to definitely have a cup of tea. Hope you enjoyed. Take care, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.